Resumes, job search techniques, traveling as a medical coder. Well, we're going to discuss that and more today. I brought on Kyle Johnston, who I met a few years ago when I was working as a supervisor in medical coding. I love giving you guys insight about my experience hiring medical coders, but I don't want you to just go by what I say alone. I want you to get additional insight from others. So Kyle has worked with a lot of healthcare organizations and companies that are hiring lots of medical coders, so he knows the insight of what jobs are looking for, and we're going to go over that today. So today I brought on Kyle from Weller Healthcare IT. Now, Kyle, you've had a long past in recruiting, and now you're working, I believe, as like a senior VP for Weller Healthcare IT, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So we met a few years ago. I was working in Lancaster, and I can't remember if I was just kind of newly transitioning into supervisor at that point, but it seems like oftentimes what happens in healthcare is, everything's a little bit private as far as what providers and specialties we're signing on until we've actually got all of the contracts in. So in
Yeah.
the coding department, we sometimes don't know that we're getting a new specialty or a ton of new providers until they're coming on in a couple of weeks, right? So what was happening is we were having trouble just finding coders in general. And
hmm
with new specialties coming on, we're like, gosh, are we going to be able to get someone that's expert in these particular specialties, you know, in a short notice in this specific area? Because at that point, there wasn't a lot of remote coding being done, at least in that company. So we talked with you in regards to, what services can you provide, or if we need on short notice specialty coders for a specific
hmm
specialty, are you going to be able to locate them? So that's how we met originally back in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and have kept connected through LinkedIn over the past few years. And you've agreed to come on today to give some insight because you've done so much hiring with coders and working with coders specifically in that field. And my viewers, a lot of them are either student coders or they're new in the medical coding field, just looking to gain some insight specifically about things like resumes and job search. So I really want to thank you for coming on today to answer some of the questions that have been coming
hmm
through, because it's one thing to hear it from me. It's another thing to hear it from someone who has really just been in the weeds for a few years.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I will remark how cold it was when we met up there in PA. I'm a Florida guy myself, so it was a pleasant surprise to me. But yes, since then and over the past 10 years, it's been staffing coders specifically. And quite often I get a lot of questions from new coders. And so there's absolutely areas where we can guide them in the right direction, and at least tips and tricks that I know they're going to allow people to get a job a little bit easier than if they're just starting from scratch. When I work with my clients, I know what they want and I know what they're looking for. It's taken time to understand that, but at this point, you have a good understanding, and we guide our candidates in order to help them get those positions. So at this point, I am over sales for the company. So I would be reaching out to potential clients, as insurance companies, health systems. It could be, acute care hospitals, provider groups, and even, IT software companies that have created coding platforms. So from there, I'll bring in those positions and our recruiters. We have a big team of recruiters, and they're actually the ones that are there speaking with candidates, finding candidates, building relationships, and obviously we place those individuals for our clients when the needs are there, whether it's a backlog, it's just contracts. Maybe they only need a coder for 3 months, or maybe it's a permanent hire. Maybe they struggled because they're in a more remote area and they can't find the talent. So obviously tap into us to help them find someone on a more full-time direct hire role. So really happy to get into it. I know you had some common questions, and I'm ready to go.
Oh, good. So the very top two questions that I get asked from my audience is always number one, what's the easiest job to get into for an apprentice coder? What kind of jobs should they look for? And then what is the highest paying that they should be aiming for in the future?
Sure. Okay, so I'll hit highest paying jobs first.
Okay.
what I see is really going to be inpatient coders. So we are talking facility-based coders that are DRG coding for hospitals at various lengths of stay. So I would call that an inpatient coder or facility coder. Those individuals on a full-time basis will be making no less than $70,000 a year and up. It obviously will go a lot higher depending on how long they've done it, and also if it's for a trauma hospital. So if they're in a major city, let's say it's New York City, and you're working at a trauma facility, you're going to be paid a whole lot more. So that 70K is kind of the low end, and it goes up from there. And worth noting, I've seen a lot of people transition into auditing work, and auditors are traditionally paid higher. And from there, I've even seen it move into CDI-based work. So your clinical documentation improvement work. So actually talking with physicians, and that's paid at an even higher level. So your trajectory would really be that facility coder into potentially auditing the coders, and then maybe eventually into some CDI and management work. And then where to look, for me, our clients, when they reach out to us, the reason they're tapping into me and paying myself and my company are because they want top-tier talent. And so they're utilizing our services. We build them and charge them for our services. So their expectation is to bring someone to the table with many years experience. However, we often see, and this is worth noting for your viewers, is companies like United Health Group and Optum, they very often hire hundreds of entry-level coders, right? That is a massive business of theirs. And it's not always on site either. This is on a remote basis. And some of their, staffing firms, which are my competition, will actually work to provide those roles. And we're going to get into a little later how you can find those, and I'll help them in terms of, where they can go to look for these positions. I will help them do that. But also, going into those job searches, to touch on this briefly, and looking up entry-level coder, that's certainly something they would want to do. Outside of that, if someone can put aside, their pride and realize that, hey, maybe I might not get that coding role right out of the gate. Maybe I've got my CPCA. Maybe I've taken some courses on coding, or I've recently graduated, and I'm really trying to find that first level job. I always tell folks, don't be completely opposed to jumping into the hospital or jumping into the provider group or jumping in something that's not coding, but that touches coding. And what I mean by that is you could go to work for a provider and they could have a front office position open. Well, if this is a one provider office, you're going to handle a lot of the coding, believe it or not. Your title is not coder.
Right.
Your title is going to be maybe front office or maybe registration. However, you're going to be touching the coding. They're going to have a one-page document that's going to have the common things they do there. If you're going into a hospital, you can look at things like medical billing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, again, registration. Just look outside the box and realize if I'm in a department that sits in the revenue cycle bubble and I have my credential, they're going to see that. And if I'm in there and I'm learning, then eventually I'm going to get myself into that coding department. I'm going to gain that experience. And then once you have that on your resume, get yourself out there. Again, we'll talk about this later, into looking for some contract, higher paid roles. And recruiters from my company and others will be looking for you.
Yeah. And I think that's something I emphasize as well, is even though your title might not be coder, because that's our mindset. We think I passed my coding certification. I need to get a job as a coder, but there's lots of other jobs that you can get within that healthcare system, within that revenue cycle, that still use codes like prior authorization. You're going to have to call up the insurance company and give them the CPT code and say, is this something that you're going to cover for this patient? And I've always said, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've had different experiences, but what I've experienced is once you are working for a healthcare organization, they have to prefer an internal candidate versus an external candidate, unless that external candidate would have something way above and beyond what that internal candidate does, because they've already got them in, they're already on payroll, they are already got their benefits set up, they know what physicians are working. So an external candidate would have to have something way above and beyond an internal candidate. So it's a lot easier once you're in to move up.
Yeah, the key factor that you just said there, not so much looking at individual rules of corporations and whether they can or cannot look externally for resources. You hit the nail on the head when you said easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier for them. And the reason is because not only are you there and you're an existing employee, but the fact that you just said you've already gone through that paperwork. You've already gone through a background, a drug screen. You're set with HR. You've got your direct deposit, your tax forms. All of this is already done. You're already in the system.
Yep.
It's going to be much easier, but really you need to show that interest. You need to make it apparent. Don't just sit back and think, oh, they're going to pick me. They're going to pick me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you're doing the right job, when you see that position post, they have to post it on their website. Even if you're an internal employee, they're still going to post it to their jobs website. Every hospital, medical group, they all have it. So you'll be able to see when it gets posted, you'll hear the rumblings, and you have to make it known that that's the position you want, and you can apply for it. And they will absolutely look internally first. You're right.
Yeah. Now, as far as though candidates that are external and they're trying to come in, there's been some debate lately on whether or not coders who are new and don't have as much experience, like little to none experience, if they see a job that says, oh, you need 2 to 3 year experience minimum, should they still apply? What's your take on that?
So from my experience, it's a no. And if someone wants to do that, absolutely, there's no rules against doing that, honestly. So they certainly can. However, they're putting in that the qualifications are in there on purpose. Mm-hmm. That's what the client looks for. If for some reason they don't fill that position, no candidates are coming through, would they then go down the list and find someone who maybe has their CPCA or a CCA and potentially approach them for it? It is possible. However, more often than not, when applying to both a staffing firm or direct to your healthcare organization, I usually go against it. And so I would go back to our previous part of our conversation, and I would start looking at other items to get in the door. So again, an individual could, but I've usually seen in my experience, it's unlikely that they end up getting the call up to interview.
Yeah, I think there might even be a difference just sometimes in the size of the organization. Maybe a smaller physician might put 2 years, and then if he's not getting anyone, he'll say, okay, maybe I'll take an apprentice. But when we're talking about larger organizations, I found that because of some of the policies that they have in place, if you put in out there an application saying that you want 2 years experience, and now all of a sudden you're going to take an applicant that doesn't have 2 years experience, that causes a conflict with human resources, that now they're like, hey, you're going to have to redo this job title because are you or are you not really requiring 2 years of experience? So there can, I think, from what I've at least experienced, and this doesn't always necessarily maybe apply everywhere, but sometimes that can cause conflict. If you're taking candidates that are outside of what that job description actually is, you might have to then correct the job description.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it is a smaller organization, if you're looking at a critical access hospital in a remote area, by all means, I would go for it. I certainly would. In some of those larger organizations, some with a little bit more clout, there's going to be a lot of applicants ahead of you that are meeting that requirement. So it's not so much it's against you, it's that your competition will be so much higher. So if you are going to decide to go and do this and not meeting the qualifications, I would agree with you. Start small. Start at some of the smaller organizations that aren't probably getting as much applicants, and you're probably going to stand out a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that's a good rule.
So for the coders that are very freshly certified, what are some of your tips for helping them gain experience in the industry? And I feel like people get very frustrated about that take where it's like, oh, how am I going to get experience if no one's going to give me a job? And I don't think that's exclusive to medical coding at all. I think that's just the entire employment system right now in the United States, that a lot of people are having trouble finding experience, getting those entry-level positions. Yeah. But is there any way that they can gain that experience as a newly certified coder?
Yeah, outside of what we've already discussed, which is trying to take an alternative role and then working your way up into that goal position that you want. It's going to take a little bit of sacrifice getting in something that not necessarily is what you wanted, but in order to earn your way up. And then outside of probably applying directly to some of the smaller organizations and getting your foot in the door, I mean, certainly the continued education. Certainly there are locations, there are companies, there are certain areas where there are education programs that are starting to happen, where companies are going out and they're specifically looking for entry-level coders on purpose. I know we mentioned United Health Group, and I'm going to tag on that again. And the reason they're doing this is maybe they struggled in their recruitment in the past, and they're going to find someone who's highly experienced. They're going to bring them in the door, and as they're trying to show them the way they want to do things, the coder's kind of backing off and saying, that's not how I was taught. And they've had this conflict between high-level individuals saying, I do it this way, and then the company who hired them saying, this is how I want you to do it. Right. And United Health Group struggle with that, and other companies do all the time. And so what we're starting to see is we're seeing a bit of a switch in the industry. This is even something that Weller's thinking about doing. It's coming in and hiring large groups of newly certified coders and training them up. And, these health systems and these healthcare groups, they want to hire you and train you up how they want to see things done. They want to train you how they do things according to their guidelines. And then that way you're brought up as, in that environment. So there are those out there. And what I want to get into a little bit later in the way that they can do this is if they're not utilizing the coding Facebook groups, and if they're not utilizing LinkedIn, and if they're not networking with recruiters out there whose job it is to find them a role, regardless of if they're newly certified, and then if they're not actively running the job board searches, it's going to be a huge struggle in order to find those entry-level roles. It's not impossible. I mean, my two biggest things are using those 4 outlets, which we'll get into, to find that entry-level role, because they do exist, and then also going back to our first part of our conversation, which was sacrificing a little bit on your job title in order to earn your way up there.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on Facebook and LinkedIn, but first, let me go back to something that I almost forgot about. So you were just talking about, what you do at Weller and some of the other organizations out there. What is the benefit for a coder for being in an organization like Weller or a Imagine Solutions that just hires specifically revenue cycle and coders versus being employed directly through a physician office or through a healthcare organization?
Yeah, I love that question. And the reason is because I can kind of boast my company and others like me. Imagine, Trust HCS, Maxim, Norwood. I mean, there's a ton. But with a organization like ours, you could call it a recruiting firm, a staffing firm. What's going to happen is if you come on board with us, and it's not for a direct hire, which means we're just helping you get to a company. That's the only time we're there, is to help you get to a company, and they hire you directly and you're off and working for them. So that's a direct hire. Outside of that, we're going to provide mostly contract work. They're going to be contract positions. They're going to range from 3 months to 3 years, and you are providing that work for our clients, the healthcare organizations. What's going to happen, and the benefit of working with us is, in a short period of time, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to work at multiple hospitals, multiple insurance companies, multiple provider groups. Each and every one of these are going to have little tweaks to guidelines. They're going to have a little bit different rules, and you're going to have a little bit different of a project, right? And you're going to learn from each one of them. You're going to have different supervisors, different managers, different leads, different auditors providing you different levels of feedback, some better than others, I'm sure. And in this amount of time, instead of working at one location and only learning from one employer, one auditor, maybe one manager, and that's it for a 3-year time, you could come to work with a staffing firm or recruiting firm like us, and you're going to work for 10 different organizations. And so not only are you going to learn from each and every one of them and gain 10 times more experience, basically, but also when you're looking at your resume, instead of having one organization for 3 years, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 over 3 years. And as long as you're putting in a consistent amount of time and you're actually writing contract on your resume, some folks, little side note, might be concerned, well, it's going to look like I'm switching jobs too much. If you're making it apparent and you write the staffing firm on there and then it is a remote contract position, it clears the air. So bottom line is you're building your resume. You're going to have listed a whole lot of high-level organizations that you did your coding for, and you're going to learn a whole lot more. So in my opinion, it's gaining more experience by working with a staffing firm.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a value to having a wide, broad knowledge of different specialties, of different systems, of the way people organize, those guidelines and how others define certain gray areas in coding. And I think that's very good. It's also important for coders to consider niching down, because there are certain specialties, that they do pay more. And some of us, as we get that breadth of knowledge, find out that, hey, we really like orthopedic coding. And then, after we've gone through, a bunch of different specialties, we can specialize just in orthopedics. So, yeah.
And that's I want to tag on to that real quick. I'm sorry. Is then you're going to open the door to, by working with that staffing company and the recruiting company, do your research, find the right one that's going to have enough jobs. There's going to be this engine that's churning for you, that's going out and finding you the positions. Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting there and you are that specialty coder, like interventional radiology, that is a niche, high-paying, specialty coding position. And I'll tell you what, if a coder like that comes to us, we're going to be sending them out everywhere. And clients will be eating them up. They're going to be wanting to pay the highest dollar. It's going to be like the housing market. They're going to be highly sought after, right? So it's a supply and demand thing. So we can assist in making sure you get a higher level pay. That's the other thing too, is if you work at one place and you're there for 2 or 3 years, hopefully you get a raise, right? Right. But in working with a staffing firm like us, if you're doing a good job in a very short period of time, we're going to start incrementally increasing your pay every time you're going to another good client of ours and doing well. We're now increasing pay. So lots of benefits.
Hey, if you're interested in learning interventional radiology coding, I have got the perfect solution for you, Cracking the IR Code, Mastering Interventional Radiology and Cardiology Coding course by Stacy Buck. Stacy is a renowned expert in interventional radiology and cardiology coding, and she takes these very complex concepts that she took a lot of time to learn and is able to just break them down in a way that's really easy to understand. Stacy has helped a lot of coders pass their CIRCC, the Certified Interventional Radiology Cardiology Coder certification, on their first attempt. So head on over to radrx.com for additional information and testimonials, and be sure to use my coupon code CONTEMPO10 for 10% off your purchase. And now let's circle back then to the social media conversation that you mentioned about LinkedIn and Facebook and joining all of those groups. A lot of times when I see social media discussions happening, especially with our accreditation organizations, it's a lot of, oh, these kids these days, stay off that Facebook, don't post this, don't post that, don't do this. We focus a lot on what you're not supposed to do on social media. But I think there's a lot of ways we can really take advantage of social media as well. So what are the ways that we can use medical coders, these platforms like Facebook, like LinkedIn, to kind of elevate our careers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just to make the broad statement, do I agree maybe with going on Facebook and or LinkedIn and just hanging out on the news feed and reading everyone's inspirational or political views? No, not so much. That's a topic for a different time, right? So I would agree with some folks there. However, those tools, if you're not using them to assist you in your job search and even making a name for yourself in your industry here for coding, you're doing yourself a disservice. Bottom line, I think they're a must. Now, we would want to look at them separately. LinkedIn and Facebook they're not equal. They're different, and you're going to utilize them for different things. I will touch on probably Facebook first, and then LinkedIn I'll get to, because I think that's probably more important. Facebook, you're just going to use as a tool to assist you in finding roles, whereas LinkedIn, you're really building your your career profile.
Mm-hmm.
So for Facebook, and hopefully most of your followers and viewers would know this, but there's Facebook coding groups.
Yes.
And there are a group section in Facebook for those who don't know. It's not hard to find. I believe it's on the left-hand corner, but if you go to groups, you can search groups. You can search medical coders. What's going to pop up is many, many different groups. They're not all created equal. But there are some that has 8,000 members. I'm a part of one that has 24,000 members. Okay. And I want to say from a staffing and recruitment standpoint, myself, my recruiters, and many other recruiters across the nation are on there daily, absolutely daily. They are posting all of their hottest jobs. They're telling you, sometimes who the client is, but they're absolutely saying, I'll give you an example. We are looking for 5 profi coders, maybe who specialize in dermatology that need to have their CPC. You only need 1 year experience. It's full remote. Email me here and I'm going to give you a free test and then we'll submit you to our client. It has their email, it's giving you that information. I mean, it's the new age, automatic. It's always coming updated again and again and again, way to find jobs. There's American Medical Coding Group. There's a jobs for American medical coders.
Yeah.
There's a medical billing group. There's a great HCC coding group. And really you're utilizing those to get in there and for 2 things. One, like I just said, the recruiters are posting their jobs. So if you want to know what jobs are going on right now, specifically on a contract basis, you have to go there. They're all in there every day. And the second thing is, it is amazing for knowledge because people will post a coding question. And you can tell these are coders who have maybe come across a chart. And obviously they're not sharing any personal information or violating HIPAA by any means, but they're certainly saying, hey, can someone remind me of what you would do in this instance? I've come across this particular chart. I don't know which way to go. You're going to see 25 comments under that question of other coders that are, 25,000 members, a part of this group. People are chiming in and helping each other. So not only is it a learning tool and a database for knowledge, but it's also the ability for you to go in and find jobs, to be perfectly honest. So that's key. Second would be for LinkedIn. And if you don't currently have a LinkedIn profile, there's a few things you can do. Absolutely make sure you have a picture. I know some folks don't want to put themselves out there and so forth, but I don't know the psychology behind it. However, having a picture to your name shows that you have an up-to-date LinkedIn profile. It shows that you're somewhat computer literate, which is huge in the coding world. Can't tell you how many times people get into coding and they might not have to do things like upload a picture to LinkedIn. So make sure you're doing those things. Make sure that, and LinkedIn honestly is going to walk you through how to make an all-star profile. It's a step-by-step process. They're very good at it. It's easy to understand. So walk yourself through that. Make sure you have a picture. Make sure you have your jobs updated. Make sure you have things like your credential. If it's from AAPC or HEMA, have it listed on there. Make sure you're having your job titles. Make sure it lists coder in any or all of your job titles. Make sure you're putting different things in there that are going to pop up as keywords because, again, myself, as well as the recruiters and all the other firms out there, we use LinkedIn to find candidates. So we're going to utilize a search tool in LinkedIn, and we're going to find, hey, inpatient coder. So if you don't have a profile in there and you don't have your job listed as a coder, you're simply not going to pop up and you're not going to be found. You can even put entry-level coder. You can put, apprentice-level coder or newly certified. I mean, I suggest it for everyone. Then what you're going to need to do is you're going to want to Google or research all of your top recruitment firms. So, your Weller, your Maxims, your Imagine, your Trust HCS, Norwood, Comforth, so Addison Group, so forth. You're going to need to find all of them on LinkedIn. Then you're going to need to go and find all of their recruiters and connect with every single one of them.
Yep.
And the sole purpose of that is because you will want to connect with them. You're going to start seeing all of their updates. Just like on Facebook, they're going to put those job updates on the LinkedIn feed. And then you're going to be able to message them on LinkedIn. And then you're going to be able to tell them, hi, I'm Sally Smith. I've got 6 months of coding experience. I'm about to drop my A and my CPCA. I'm open to anything and everything you might have. What's your email so I can go ahead and send you my resume? And once you start forming relationships with these recruiters on LinkedIn, that's your easiest way to do it. You're going to be able to get their emails from them, talk to them, tell them what you want. So it's a networking tool. And so much of this is about forming the relationship with people who can help you, like my recruiters and recruiters from other firms. They are paid when you get a position. It's advantageous for them to find you a role. So I can't speak enough good things about both Facebook and LinkedIn. Highly recommend both.
Yeah, and I think it's great. There are definitely, like I said, a few things maybe you shouldn't be doing there, but there's just so many jobs you can find. Once, like you said, you connect with those recruiters, and it'll pop up right on your feed. Weller Healthcare IT is hiring 5 hospitalist coders. They're organizing for right now. HCC is very big, so there's a lot of places that are hiring 50, 100 HCC coders for 6-month, 9-month contracts. And, you can log into LinkedIn, and then it's just right there because you've already connected with the recruiters, and everything's just popping right up on your feed as they're posting it. Now, you mentioned though about sending out resumes. So what are some of your best tips for what should be on a resume, specifically for coders that don't have a lot of experience, or maybe they're just coming out of school, or maybe they're making a career switch? How can they format their resume, or are there key things they can put on their resume to stand out from other entry-level coders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think overall, and the comments I'm going to make on resumes, I think are across the board. Not only for a new coder, they need to adhere to these basics, but also for someone who's been in the industry for 20 years and they just want a quick revision to their resume. Maybe they're looking for a new job again. In my opinion, you might have too much experience. However, do your best to make it 1 page. There's that old rule of, someone said, 7 seconds is all you get when someone sees your resume and it's a hiring manager. And to be honest, it's probably less than that. And the reason is they're going to look and they're going to glance quite quickly. They're going to see your name. They're going to see if it's a coding role. They're going to see your name. They're going to see the credential next to it, or credentials. You say, okay, it's a good start. They're going to immediately move down from there. Not so much an objective, but they're going to move into a summary, which is going to be a high-level overview, and they're going to move right into your first position. If your first position is at least 1 year long, that's probably going to be sufficient enough. More often than not, they'll move into the second role, and they'll see how long it went, and they'll drop all the way down to your education and see your education, and that's it. So it happens very, very fast. So my number 1 rule is going to be, if you can condense it into 1 page, that is key. In some industries, cover letters are still important. I don't disagree with a cover letter. However, more often than not, people just want to get to the juice, which is the resume. So if you want to save time, if you just have a 1-page resume, you're fine. Always put your name at the top with your credential. Even if it's a CCA, even if it's a CPCA, it has got to be at the top. Don't put your credentials all the way down in your education. Put it up top next to your name. Objective, I don't necessarily believe you need an objective. If you're applying to the job, then they're going to know what your objective is. Your summary, I do think that's important. You can usually have 3 to 4 bullets in a summary. Your summary really needs to include, what have you done? And even if it's just you've done education and you have not yet had that first coding role, that's okay. You can still make it look good by saying, I had X amount of hours applied to learning my craft. Calculate, if you did 2 years of schooling, calculate how many hours that was. Not going to take very long. Put that in there. If that just looks big, and they're like, oh, that's a lot. They've devoted a lot of time to this. But it's going to have to be a high-level overview of, why are you better than the other? Well, I dedicated this many hours to it. Obviously your organization, self-driven individual. I think those are important. Just don't overdo those things.
Yeah.
And then going down into experience, I always recommend, you're going to want to have your date, of course, the employer, location doesn't always matter, and then title. And try to keep it to 3 or 4 bullet points as well. And it really needs to be what you did for that company. So
Right.
if you are a coder and maybe you only have 6 months of experience, it does need to be things like always met productivity standards. Let's say you had to do 3 charts an hour, say consistently met 3 charts an hour in production. Quality is always 95%, so consistently met 95% and above in my audits, right? And things like, outperformed other coders by performing, twice as many charts and got done twice as much volume and helped secure, X, Y, and Z. Really, what did you do and why would they want to hire you for that? So really, a short, concise resume explaining what you've done for these other companies. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if it was just schooling, really you're supposed to exaggerate and you're supposed to make it look like, look at me, look at what I've done. All of it is supposed to be an exaggeration. Never lie, but, kind of break it down in, why you're special. Those are my main points. But again, not only having that resume, but touching back on making sure that when you're going through those Facebook groups and you're seeing the recruiters posting, those recruiters are putting their emails in there. Mm-hmm. And so even if it's for an HCC job and you're trying to become a facility coder, that's okay. These recruiters work on all coding roles. So you take their email them, take your resume, your one-page resume, email it over to them and say, hey, I noticed you're always posting. Here's what I'm looking for. Here's my experience. Please save it and touch base with them. Every 3 months, set a calendar invite, set a notice in your phone every 3 months. You hit that recruiter up again and say, hey, by the way, I'm still looking. Did you have anything? And LinkedIn, do the same thing. When you connect with these recruiters, take that one-page resume, attach it to the message, send it on over to them and say the exact same thing. This is what I'm looking for. Here's what I've done, and here's what I can do for you. So there's multiple steps to this, but if you're not using those to your advantage, whether you have no experience or you have 20 years, it works the same. You've got to utilize, all these tools together into one.
Yeah. What's your take on things like your basic office skills? Like, should coders include that they know how to use Word and PowerPoint and how to format an email? Or are those at this stage kind of a given? Like, we expect that if we're hiring you for a coding position, you know how to, format things in a spreadsheet in Excel.
I think for the younger generation, I think we've gotten out of that only because it's almost a given that you were, using computers in second grade, So I do think, however, it's extremely important to use things like, here's the encoders I've used. I know 3M, I know Quantum. To mention any EMR. Let's say you were a medical biller or in registration and you're looking to get into coding. You need to be writing, I know Cerner, Allscripts, Epic. Those, so not so much your Excel spreadsheet and Outlook, but jumping into the EMRs, jumping into your encoders, and even more importantly, if you've ever had any work done where you have to log into a VPN like Citrix, if you've had to work through a virtual desktop, a lot of clients, if you're remote, due to HIPAA, you're going to absolutely need to be logging into a virtual desktop that's secure, where you can't do a shared screen and things. So what we're looking for, not so much if you can handle an email and an attachment and an Excel spreadsheet, we're looking at, if we try to tell you to get access into an EMR and an encoder and a virtual desktop, can you do that? Are you proficient enough with IT and computers that you can get yourself into these systems? So however you can word that, that's a probably good thing for your summary up at the top. X amount of hours schooling and coding, or 5 years coding experience. And then start putting in, I'm proficient in these systems. I'm completely computer literate. Maybe even I've taken this computer course. That's what we're looking for.
Okay. Now, as far as customizing resumes and cover letters, do you feel that coders need to make different cover letters or different types of resumes, tweak their resumes at all for different positions that they may be applying for?
I do think that you should in only a couple instances. I think the most glaring instance is you will quite often see a pro fee coder or professional fee, which is a provider-based ambulatory coder. You'll see them jump back and forth into HCC coding positions. Mm-hmm. And what happens sometimes is if they're going after an HCC role, if a hiring manager sees the resume and they're jumping back and forth between that and your professional fee roles, they might say, no thanks. So in that instance, I would have them make one pro fee resume, one HCC resume. In that instance, I think yes. But if you're a tried and true ED coder, no. You're only going to need to have your resume that clarifies for ED. So I would only see it as if you jump in between two different specialties all the time. Then in that instance, I would create two.
Now, I have a percentage of my audience that is located outside of the US and wants to work remotely for inside the US. And then I also have coders that are, or maybe students of coding or interested in coding that are US based, but they're interested in, doing travel work. It's kind of popular right now that people are like, oh, we'll redo a van and we'll have a little van house and we'll travel into the mountains. And they're, like, oh, well, can I do medical coding while I'm on top of, the mountains and traveling to the desert and going down to the beach?
Yeah.
What have you seen as far as requirements for coders that want to work in the US that are outside of the US, and also coders that are in the US and want to travel back and forth?
So I'll look at that separately. More often than not, when I have a client come to me, whether it's an insurance company, whether it's a health system, an individual hospital, more often than not, they're coming to me and they're saying, I want domestic, onshore, US-based coder. And we have occasionally hired individuals from Puerto Rico, let's just say Hawaii, outside of the continental US. And what's interesting is through the onboarding process, when they're logging in, if they're using a VPN, whatever they're doing to log in, their IP address will actually ping that it's outside of the continental US. And the client will come in and flag it and say, hey, what's going on here? We have specific requirements. So I would say for myself, when I get positions in, the client is absolutely putting in the qualifications they have to be US based. So I wouldn't even have the opportunity to hire anyone that's outside of the US. That being said, there are certain locations such as the Philippines, India, that has a massive amount of coders. I mean, thousands and thousands of coders that work for gigantic organizations like GEBS, for example. Others that have these offshore machines that are up and churning. So there are opportunities for offshore coders, but I kind of want to put in that caveat that it's got to be a client that understands that this person's outside the U.S. They've got to understand that that is the setup. And it's pretty clearly noted. I mean, you're in these Facebook groups and LinkedIn and you see those posts. More often than not, it's for domestic-based work. So I do find it a little bit more difficult if you're outside the U.S. to get a position, unfortunately. Now, for the folks that want to travel anywhere in the U.S., they want to be in, Oregon 1 week, and they want to be in, Montana, and they're going to do a cross-country trip to New York. I mean, that sounds fantastic, right?
Right. One
of the reasons remote coding or coding is so sought after is for that reason, because technically you can do that. I have coders that have worked projects for me, and they've lived in 3 different locations across the U.S. while they've done one single project for me.
All right.
So it absolutely, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, it does not matter where in the U.S. you are. The only difference would be is if you've given me a schedule, adhere to that schedule. So it's going to be a little weird if you're in Cali versus if you're in New York City. Time zones might mess you up a little bit. So clients normally will say, hey, you have to work this schedule and you have to tell me what time zone you're in. So that could get tricky. However, part of the beauty of remote coding is just that. You can be remote and you can be anywhere. I mean, a lot of my coders are saying, hey, my family's taking a vacation to Miami, and they're from Tennessee. And they said, but I'm going to bring my laptop and I'm going to work the whole time that my family's down at the beach. I'm going to bring my laptop with me. I have a hotspot and I'm going to get my coding done. And you know what? They do. There's no negativity around that. There's no, really issues with it. As long as you're still logging in your VPN and you're being secure, it should not matter the exact location as long as you're within the U.S.
Awesome. Well, that'll be really great for some of my viewers to hear, because they've been telling me that they want to go traveling across the U.S. and they're not sure if they can code.
Yeah.
I'm like, from what I understand, as long as you have a secure internet connection, I mean, you're probably going to see some of those outliers out there that might have something more strict than the general. But I think basically the security being there, and the privacy. Obviously, you can't be logging in from a cafe with your laptop, but as long as you're in a private area.
Yeah, don't use the Starbucks free internet. There are certain rules around it. And, when we hire individuals, there's an onboarding process and there's certain things that they have to go through and understand. So that stuff is thoroughly thought out, but individuals can have their own Wi-Fi hotspots that obviously have passwords. There's a lot of clients that make them go through Duo, which is a two-step verification where it's actually going to send a code to your phone every time you go to log in. So the industry is certainly built to be secure. And as long as you're working for a reputable staffing firm and the client they have to work for is reputable, those measurements, they're going to be in place. And you can be anywhere. So you can be in Miami and you can be in Seattle and you're just fine.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Kyle. I mean, this was extremely helpful. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you think would be helpful to the rest of my audience?
No, these are important topics. And the only thing I would say, the big glaring message here, especially for the new individuals, is it's all about networking. Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, some people are good at this and some people are not, but you're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to utilize some of those things that I said, such as, perfecting that resume, condensing it down to one page, getting on social media, making sure that you're doing the due diligence to go out and find who are the folks that hire. I know probably one thing I would add is, outside of getting yourself in LinkedIn and connecting with the companies and the recruiters and introducing yourself to them, and doing that on Facebook, following the Facebook groups, reaching out to recruiters with their emails, seeing the jobs. The other important thing would probably be the job boards. Making sure you have resumes on monster.com, get on Career Builder, get on Indeed. You need to get onto these, and you need to absolutely have an active resume on every single one of those. Some of them do ask for cover letters. Some of them do want you to put in, an objective. And I think in that instance, on the job boards, that is important. So I would add job boards to it. Make sure your resume out there. And then it's about just continuing the cycle and really getting after it, because eventually, as long as you're doing the networking and you're getting yourself out there, you can't sit and wait. And that's the message.
I absolutely agree with you, Kyle. I think networking is extraordinarily crucial. And even things like, as a coder, if you go to your local chapter, you can network with other coders, and they can even direct you to some of the places that they've connected with in the past. Like, here's a recruiter that I've worked with. Here's an organization that I saw is hiring. So again, thank you so much, Kyle. Where can my viewers connect with you?
Yes, so my email is kjohnston@Weller. So that's KJOHNSTON @Weller, which is WELLER, and there's an HIT at the end. So that's wellerhit.com. So go ahead and email me, Kyle Johnston on LinkedIn, Kyle Johnston on Facebook, and you can even go to the Weller page on both LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And you should be able to find me if you have any follow-up questions to anything I said. absolutely encourage you to reach out to me. We can dive in a little deeper. If you are looking for a role, by all means, I can put you in touch with my recruiters as well. We'd be happy to help you. And yeah, obviously, I really appreciate you having me. And hopefully what I shared will be helpful.
I think it definitely will be. And I will make sure that I include links to where to contact you in the description of my video. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I'll see you again soon. Amazing, amazing discussion. I am so appreciative of Kyle for coming on and providing that insight to you, the viewers. If you have any additional comments or questions, let me know in the comments below. I will see you guys in the next video. And until then, you just keep on coding on.